I'm going to get started. Let me share my screen. All right, so Barry, is it slideshow up? Okay, great, thank you. All right, so it's more on the PPP updated as of yesterday. And we'll go over the basics again, but we're going to spend a bit more time on the forgiveness worksheets. And also we'll talk about the Flexibility Act, the PPP Flexibility Act that the House of Representatives passed and that the Senate is considering. So as we know, original round, second round, there is still second round money. People are being encouraged to apply, especially with the Flexibility Act in the wings. And so still money out there. So if you haven't applied, it still makes sense to apply. These are the terms that have been in place all along. When we get to the Flexibility Act, you'll see that they want to make them a bit more flexible. That's why they call it the Flexibility Act, but positive for the business owner. So 2-year repayment term, 1% interest, and the loan amount is 2.5 times average monthly payroll. As we've talked about before, anybody who's received the PPP loan for less than $2 million is deemed to have met this requirement that current economic uncertainty made the loan request necessary. So that's a good thing. It would be tough to prove. The bad news is that there is a tax impact of forgiveness because anything that you use PPP money for that is a forgiven expense cannot be deducted on your 2020 tax return. So conclusion is the PPP is still a good deal, but you may have to pay tax on the forgiven part. To review the disbursement requirements, go back, you have to take the money within 10 days of the loan approval, which most banks are just going ahead and putting the money right in your account. The 8-week period begins on the date the funds are deposited in your account. If the loans aren't dispersed within 20 days, they're canceled, which, you know, several businesses in our area, because they were shut down, were hoping to wait and take their money, but they couldn't. And the loan funds used during the 8-week period for qualified expenses are eligible for forgiveness. Nothing new on this sheet. 75% of the loan must be used for payroll to qualify for forgiveness. You can also use group health insurance, retirement contributions, and state unemployment. You can't use FICA, otherwise known as Social Security. And there's a limit. The most that can be forgiven for any one employee is $15,385 in the 8-week period. That ties back to the limit of the PPP could not fund annualized payroll more than 100,000 or more. So you've spent the 75% on payroll. What happens next? Or more, but what happens next? There's a reduction to the forgiveness amount if an employee's pay was reduced by more than 25% during the 8-week period, compared to the rate of pay for the first quarter of 2020. There are detailed instructions on the SBA forgiveness form. Key thing here to remember, it's a reduction in the rate of pay, not the hours paid. So you could reduce an employee's hours, but not their rate of pay, and this first reduction does not apply to you. The second possible reduction is the FTE requirement. So basically here you have to show that you had the same number of FTEs during the 8-week period that you did either in a prior period, a comparable period from 2019, or the first 2 months of 2020. So this is the average FTEs during the 8-week period compared to the average FTEs in one of those test periods. And a special note, we've got a spreadsheet where we calculate those averages and we look for planning purposes, but when you get to the actual forgiveness form, the FTEs have to be calculated by employee. Not that you have to have the same employees during the 8-week period that you had before, but the FTE calculation. There is a safe harbor. If you get back to your full FTEs by June 30th, then you don't need to worry about this calculation. And you can also get to add back FTEs for employees if during the 8 weeks they were fired for cause, they voluntarily resigned, they requested and received a reduction in their hours. So you don't get penalized for those. And if you made a good faith written offer to hire an employee back during that covered period and they said no, you also get to count them. So those are ways that you cannot get hurt by a reduction in FTEs. This is something that is clarified in the SBA forgiveness instructions. So payroll funds are eligible if they are paid or incurred during the 8-week period. And there's also an alternate payroll period. So once you get the money, in this example uses a biweekly payroll, you can calculate your eligible payroll costs by starting your 8-week period on the first day of the first pay period following the date you got your PPP funds. Now try to say that fast. But the example is, if you got your PPP money on Monday, April 20th, and the first pay period after that begins the following Sunday, April 26th, then your 8 weeks for the payroll forgiveness starts with that April 26th date. So that basically gives you additional 6 days, and it makes your payroll calculation much easier than trying to go back and accrue and prorate and all of that. So for the other 25% of the forgiveness, the proceeds can be used to pay for rent, real and personal property. So that includes auto leases and things of such as that. Utilities, which include electric, gas, water, transportation, telephone, and internet access. And special thanks to Scott and Bob, who are on this call, for bringing up the transportation, because they asked the question last week. I did some research, and it was even discussed in the webinar I was on yesterday about transportation. So the good thing is I can tell you transportation is included in utilities, but I can't give you the definition of what transportation is. So in line with the spirit of the law, the idea is to help small businesses get through this time. At this point, it looks like it would be okay to apply that description reasonably, and just to make sure that you document it to the nth degree to satisfy your bank that you're meeting the requirements of the law. Hopefully there'll be some clarification. I don't know if it was clarified in the current legislation that's in front of Congress or not, but once again, thanks to Scott and Bob for bringing that to my attention. This really is a collaborative effort trying to figure this law out and what it means, so appreciate feedback on that. So mortgage interest is also eligible for that 25% forgiveness. And the key date is that for rent and mortgage interest, you have to have agreements that were in place as of February 15th. They don't want people going out and taking out new loans or new leases just because they have the PPP money. All right. There's also a wrinkle in the non-payroll costs when you can pay, in the fact that you can either pay or incur them. So, for example, utilities. If somebody's covered period began on June 1st and ends on July 26th, the business can pay their May and June electricity bills during the covered period and apply those for forgiveness. They can also include a portion of their July bill that's due on August 10th, even though they pay it on August 10th outside the period, because a portion of their July bill, the amount that was incurred through July 26th, was incurred during the covered period and is therefore eligible for forgiveness. So here's kind of a rule of thumb about this whole PPP loan forgiveness. There is a paid or incurred rule which works to the business owner's advantage. So it can start out with something that you paid during the 8-week period that may have been for previous periods, but you paid it during the 8-week period, or incurred at the end. In effect, it's the cash method on the front end, if you're used to talking about accounting methods, and accrual on the back end. I guess I'll show the worksheet again. It's, I know we've been showing this quite a bit, but we won't spend a lot of time on it, but it does help to take a look at it again, I think. And I just used it earlier today. So there it is. And okay, there we are. All right, let me share my screen again. So, Barry, are we seeing the spreadsheet? Okay, great. So once again, this is for illustration and planning purposes only. The actual SBA form requires a lot more detail, and this truly is a planning worksheet. We've been using it with some of our small businesses to help them figure out where they are. And I'm just going to go over it high level today because several of you have gone through this already and I don't want to make it painful. The so this business got $49,000 in PPP. To get full forgiveness of the payroll, they'd have to spend at least $37,388. So you can see from the gross pay during their period, it's taking them a while to get back to what they consider full payroll. So with these projections, they're only going to spend $28,000. And their FTEs, if you look at this green column, they're going from 3 until they get back up to 8, which for them is considered full FTEs. Now, based upon their amount of payroll at $28,000, that's only 57% of the PPP money, so they're not going to get the full amount forgiven. And based on their FTEs, their average during this period is 5.8. Their averages during their 2019 comparison period, over here in the light green, is 7. So they're only at 83% of their FTEs. So their potential forgiveness is this 28,000 times that 83%. So at this point, the most they could get forgiven is 23,000. Now, something we haven't talked about before, but which is becoming more clear, is if they got to June 30th and they are back up to their full FTEs, then this reduction here would go away. So, you know, even though the end of the 8-week period ends before June 30th, they still have that June 30th harbor to work with. So that's a, you know, there's a lot of planning that can be done to maximize this forgiveness. In this case, the business has rent at $5,000 during that period. Utilities of $1,000, but that's just based on what they paid. So, you know, they may be able to accrue some of their utilities that would be paid later in June. But with this simple information, they've got $6,000 in forgivable utilities compared to their $12,000 $12,462.75 requirement. So they're not going to get full forgiveness there. So we look at what they're going to have to repay based on this information. And with the original amount of the PPP of $49,000, the forgivable expenses of $29,000, they'd have $20,000 to be repaid. So should they still have taken the PPP funds? Sure, because they've got a 1% loan for 2 years and their monthly payment will be $857. So that's what I keep advising people is worst case scenario, the PPP is still a good deal, but obviously the more you get forgiven, the better deal it is. All right, so let me go back to the PowerPoint. So we looked at the worksheet. All right, so let's take a look at the SBA Form 3508 for loan forgiveness. It's an 11-page form. There's 3 major sections: the forgiveness calculation, the payroll forgiveness analysis, and the backup worksheet. The Schedule A worksheet is at the heart of it. Table 1 lists all employees who are included in payroll forgiveness. Actually, it includes everybody that's 100,000 or less. There's another table for 100,000 or more. It includes the employee name, identifier, cash compensation, average FTE by employee, and any salary hourly wage reduction. So going back earlier in the presentation, this was the first reduction. And this is if you reduced your employee's hourly rate. If you did not reduce anyone's hourly rate during the 8-week period, when you get to the table, you can just enter 0 and you don't have to go through all those calculations, but you will need to document it. If you did reduce people's rates, then you have to go through the calculation on the forgiveness form, which is kind of a crazy calculation. It's too bad it's not on a spreadsheet. For forgiveness, you're going to have to include payroll registers and quarterly payroll reporting forms, canceled checks or account statements for employee health and retirement payments, and the backup for your FTE calculation. For your non-payroll expenses, for interest, you have to include the lender amortization schedule. For rent, you'll have to include lease agreements along with documentation of paying it. And for utilities, you'll need to include invoices and canceled checks and account statements. So this is what the Schedule A worksheet looks like for the key information: the employee's name, the identifier, the cash compensation, the average FTE, and that salary hourly wage reduction is where you put 0 if you did not reduce anyone's pay. The loan forgiveness application does not provide any directions for self-employed people who receive the PPP funding. Hopefully they'll clarify that. What we're advising those individuals is just to make sure that they have a clear trail from their business account to their personal account, or the amount of the draw that they used, PPP funds, basically to replace their draw from last year. Now, here's the good stuff. So this is the PPP Flexibility Act that the House of Representatives passed 417 people to 1. It's a 14-page long act compared to the original CARES Act, which was 800 pages. So, so this is something pretty amazing. So the good thing is it proposes to change the 8-week period to 24 weeks, which would mean everybody would be able to meet the requirements for the 75% then. The Senate bill just so far is saying 16 weeks. It extends a safe harbor for FTE calculation from June 30th to 12/31. Extends a deadline to apply for a PPP loan from June 30th to 12/31. If this goes through, I imagine we're going to have a lot more applications. And I know of at least one business in our area that didn't take it because she didn't think she'd be able to open by the time that she was supposed to have money spent. It'll reduce the payroll requirement from 75% to 60%. The Senate bill would keep 75%. This one's a little confusing, but it makes sense. Right now, whatever is not forgiven, you have to start repaying the loan 6 months after your 8-week period ends. But we all know that it's going to take time to process this, and the SBA might not accept the forgiveness period or forgiveness amount for several months. So you could be in the awkward position of having to repay a loan that then gets forgiven. So this slows that down, and the loan payments do not start until the SBA says yes, and they agree with the bank, it's forgiven. And so then you enter into a loan agreement with your bank. It would allow for a 5-year repayment instead of a 2-year repayment. And it also, this is a lot of words, but basically, and the key part is the last sentence. For businesses that couldn't resume business levels from before February 15th because they were complying with federal COVID rules, and sorry, I misspelled COVID, sanitation or social distancing guidelines, basically the FTE requirement is not considered in part of the forgiveness. The reason this is good is because, in effect, for businesses that were closed down during New York pause, it takes the FTE requirements away. Or, yeah, basically it just, we've got to wait and see just how it works out. And obviously this is proposed legislation, but I think this responds particularly well to our phased in reopenings. So that's it for the PPP updates, and I would gladly take questions, and hopefully I have answers. So do we have questions? Barry, have you been watching the chat room? Or Ashley?
Barry Nicholson just posted something that the Senate passed House bill last night.
Oh, excellent. Boy, thank you. Thanks for paying attention to that. So do you know, Barry, did the changes that the Senate wanted that I just included?
As I understand it, there was a little haggling from Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, I believe, but I believe it got passed as exactly as the House bill.
Wow.
Through, so 60% versus 75, and 24 months versus 8 months. I forgot what the other sticking point the Senate had, so there may have been one I missed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that's terrific. Thank you. Like I said, this is a collaborative effort. And I'm going to reach back out to a couple of the businesses that didn't want to do it and one that turned it down to say, please go back, because that's key information. And it makes a huge difference to anybody impacted by the phased reopenings. So.
Nancy, Kajal had a question as well.
Okay. Please go ahead, Kajal. Kajal, I can't hear you. I don't know if you want to, if you're muted or.
I think, yeah, there she is.
Okay.
Your phone is muted, Kajal, so you have to unmute your phone.
Better. Does that work better?
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right. Let's take off the phone here. Okay. So my question is, with the new changes of going from June to December, what if I finish spending my money in July? Do you think I'd be able to apply for forgiveness then, or do you think I really have to wait till December? I know this is still kind of a.
Yeah. Yeah, there's nothing holding you up for applying for forgiveness. If you spent the money and met the requirements, you can apply for forgiveness. And
Okay.
the webinar I was in yesterday, they said, don't be one of the first ones to apply for forgiveness, because you don't want to be the guinea pig and get that scrutiny from the SBA.
Sure.
You know, don't rush into it. You have 60 days to, I think it's 60 days to apply after the end of your 8-week period. So I would certainly get all the documentation ready, make the bank's job easy, make the SBA's job easy, and apply later on and during that period, because I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot as different applications come in.
Right. It's true. Okay. Thank you.
Barry, did you want to kind of go over what the hyperlink was that you just sent out?
It's just an article from the Journal of Accountancy that gives quite a bit of detail. The first statement is Senate passed the House version of the Paycheck Protection Program on Wednesday night, but then it gets into a lot of detail on exactly what is in the House bill.
Okay, great.
A lot of what Nancy summarized here.
Well, thank you for that, Barry, and I'll make sure I get to that article. I've been giving presentations all day, so I haven't been able to do the research I normally would do. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was online and doing research up until evening yesterday, but then got on this morning and did my updates and ran. So it's a process right now. That is great. That's great news.
Presumably, the president will sign it. That's still a next step, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Now I'll turn it over to Barry Hemley then for latest information on reopening.
All right, I'll get started. So lots of new things happened today. So phase 2, some of the updates that are happening right now. Phase 2 folks can reopen outdoor dining beginning today. One of the other pieces that happened this morning is that they're also allowing, with the outdoor dining, alcohol to be served in places that have licenses to serve alcohol. So a lot of the key pieces of that, the on-premise service of the beverages and food, it's going to be until July 3rd. So they've given it an end date at this point of when it will be till, and it could be extended or reduced based on any kind of circumstances. So the consumption piece is any consumption of food or beverage may happen outdoor, open air areas without a fixed roof. Any consumption of food and beverage must happen while seated at a table. So if you are not seated at a table, you have to have a mask on. And I believe that would be pretty difficult to drink a beer. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. So all tables must be 6 feet apart. Any seat at a bar, counter, similar contrivance must be 6 feet apart. All staff of the licensed business must wear masks. All customers must wear masks anytime they're not seated. Consumption shall be subject to all relevant orders. So one of the things that it also said, and I won't get into a ton of detail, is that if you have the ability to extend your seating area, you have the ability to do that now. So businesses, bars that have sidewalk space would be able to allow tables to go out there so that they could have seating. One of the things that gets tricky with that is the liquor license is set for a specific square footage of your establishment. So, you know, people are not going to be able to get crazy unless they re-up their liquor license. So I think it's going to be extremely interesting to see how it plays out. But at least in New York State, you can now enjoy a burger at a table at a restaurant outside. So good news there. So some of the other pieces that we've been talking about as far as reopening your business, some key factors. So pieces that you're going to want to be looking at are your staff. Are they protected? Your customers, are they protected? Minimizing the number of vendors you have in your facility, space. So one of the keys that they've been talking about is, as far as space, is that you are reducing it. by 50%. So whatever you've been okayed with as far as your certificate of occupancy, you're going to want to have that at least at half as you reopen. So
Those are
again,
not hard-boiled.
social etiquette is another
should be
one
some
as
hard-boiled
far
ones
as
in there.
hygiene practices. So having the signage that you're washing your hands in restrooms, and then cleaning and sanitizing. A big piece of the cleaning and sanitizing is actually having a documented cleaning plan, so that you're having whoever is doing the cleaning signing off that they're doing it, and what areas have been cleaned and how often. And for each of these steps, I just said you want to have a plan, you want it to be documented, and the other key piece of this is it's got to be communicated. So you've got to have that communication piece as well. So some of the key discoveries going through developing our own plan. So finding out what PPE your staff is going to need, if you're going to need to have any PPE for your customers. Ensuring that you have that and you have an adequate amount of that on hand at all times. The health screening piece, so regardless of what type of phase you're in, you have two options. One is a thermometer, and the other is a 3-question assessment that you have to do for your staff on a daily basis. And really, there isn't any real easy options for that right now. It's a matter of sending an email to them if you have to, if you're not on site, sending an email and just making sure that they've signed it and affirmed that they haven't been exposed to anybody, they don't have any symptoms, and that they've been healthy for the last 24 hours, basically. Need to develop a cleaning sanitizing strategy. So this one was interesting. So you have to have approved chemicals. So there are certain chemicals you can and can't use. The state has a list. If you have a cleaning company, or if you don't have a cleaning company or janitorial staff, engage somebody now. If you don't have a cleaning service, right now is a good time to hire one. The other piece is with the journal. Basically, it's a journal entry that people are doing every day. You've got to make sure that it is highlighted what areas they're cleaning, what touch points, how often they're sanitizing, and then who is doing it. So if somebody comes in and says, hey, I feel like I have COVID and I've been tested and I have it, you want to be able to go back to your diagram and say, this is who was cleaning, this is what was cleaned, so that you have a plan. Use the summary guidelines that the state provides for your industry group. Each industry group is going to have a set of guidelines. They're all a little bit different, but most of the mandatory stuff is the same. Reduce building populations, we talked about. Customers are not required to wear masks in most instances, but under this phase 2 outside restaurant stuff, that has been a requirement if they are not seated. So finalizing reopening, and I've got oopsie on there. So if you forget to, some of the things that can happen. So affirm you've read the guidelines and create an opening plan. In summary, if you've completed the 4 bullets below, you're open. So the governor gives green light for the industry to open. You've reviewed your industry specific guidelines. You've created and communicated and are following your industry specific plan, and you have completed your online affirmation. So who is in business right now, and have you completed your affirmations? Has everybody done that at this point that is able to be open? Anyone? Oh, Kajal, thank you. Good job. So if any of the 4 criteria are not met, at least as a financial They're saying that retail, the maximum is $10,000 fine. Manufacturers, the maximum of $100,000 fine if you have not done those 4 steps. So you open prior to the governor saying you can open. You haven't reviewed your guidelines or created a plan, or you haven't completed your affirmation and you're operating. So some of the things that can happen if you're a licensed business, whether it be a barber shop, a liquor license, bar, those could be suspended if you're found to not have done those. Also, just to let you know, there is a hotline that allows businesses to be reported by both their patrons and their staff. So people are taking this really seriously. So just be aware of that. And that's really all I've had. The last two, the first 2 items, as far as being able to go out into a restaurant again, at least on outside, is a huge step. So hopefully we'll see more of that as we start to reopen. Any questions? All right, that was it from me. Oh, I see Barry's got one. So mask rules for customers. The mask rules are that you have to have it on if you are not seated at a table. This is outside for the restaurants and bars right now. Yeah, and my understanding is most places are requiring masks. I don't believe that masks are required in all areas, but the food and beverage is definitely a must at this point. So
Yeah, that's been an odd one. I know I thought that masks were required under social distancing rules and the 6 feet and all that, but
yeah, phase 2's kind of changed some things a little bit.
yeah, that was something that we heard the attorney speak about yesterday in the session. Did she give the reference for that, Barry? Have you checked that out?
No, she didn't. She didn't add any context to that, which I was hoping for. But there is a requirement, at least as far as the restaurants go, for the outside service, and that's really all I've seen on that. So outside service, the employees have to have masks on as they're serving you your food, and then the customers also have to have a mask on if they are not seated at a table. So somebody coming in to outdoor seating, if they're just having a beer, they have to have a mask on unless they're seated at a table, which is, it's odd, but.
So, but employees and service providers have to wear masks.
Correct.
So
for the restaurants, yes.
But even for non-restaurants, for phase 2 employees, so like at the incubator, we need to wear masks.
Yes. Yes. But
the people who
customers
come
do
in,
not.
but the people who come into our facility, we can require them to wear masks.
So tenant-wise, because we would consider them staff, I guess, for the most part. They would have masks on because it's part of our requirement. If we were to allow visitors into our facility, it would be based on our requirement. So we're not allowing people to access the facility. But with the retail environment, they're saying that customers do not necessarily have to wear masks if it's not a requirement from the store.
Okay. Barry, what do you?
I'm not under that same impression. I'm under the
Yeah.
impression that the executive order that came out that said if you can't have 6 feet of social distance, regardless of where you are, and you're in public, you have to wear a mask. And to reinforce that, I'm pretty sure the governor came out and said any business can require masks to be worn specifically for customers. So maybe there's some gray area there that says, you know, it's not due state law or something, but ultimately it's up to the business. But
Right.
you would be hard pressed, I would think, in any indoor space to prove that you can always have 6 feet of social distance provided. So I think it's a big risk
Right.
to say that you're not going to have customers wearing masks coming into your location.
I don't disagree.
You see behind me the sign that's on the door of all my businesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Figures.
great.
You know, a few of the stores that I visited here, they all have signs that just say you're not allowed in unless you have a mask, and they all took my temperature before I walked in. There's a couple of stores I went to recently, but I think Gary is right and concerned that there was those conflicts where people were being told to wear a mask by the security guard at the business, and then there was like some violence ensuing because of it. So I think Barry is right that there was some sort of executive order that gave businesses a little bit more power.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Barry.
Yeah, and you're in California too, right? Just to give people.
I am. I'm actually right in the middle of those riots. So unfortunately,
Oh no.
our business is closed, but now they're boarded up. So that's
Right.
a bit of a challenging week.
Well, stay safe.
Thanks. Curfew is lifted, so finally we can go out again.
Good. Yeah, that's a whole nother dynamic of things to deal with, right?
Really bad for the small business owners. You know, they've been waiting 10 weeks to open.
Absolutely terrible.
You know, to have this on top of it, it was very unfortunate.
Yeah. Well, hang in there.
I hope to be back in Elford soon where there's some sanity.
So it'd be great to have you back. So any other questions or discussion for the group today? Well, as always, we really appreciate your time and your input. As we've seen today, we need to have input from the group to help each other out. None of us are experts in any of this, so.
Right.
So we appreciate it. Oh, I need to do some advertising for our next program. On June 16th, we're going to be launching a program we're calling Road to Recovery. It'll be 5 sessions. There'll be weekly sessions on Tuesday starting at 3:30 p.m. and going to 5 p.m. We picked Tuesday because I hope this is still true, Barry Nicholson. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I understood for years that Tuesday is the slowest day in retail, and we're expecting that we'll have some retail companies that want to participate. And we'll have 5 sessions, go over assessing your situation, understanding your changing customer, reimagining your business, marketing in the new landscape, and cash flow projections. How are you going to make it? So we'll be starting that. And we want to have cohorts of 12 to 15 people so it can be interactive, because we think that interaction is one of the best things to help us all help each other and survive and grow in this environment. There's not going to be a charge for it, but we are asking people to apply. Where it's possible that we may have more people than for one cohort, so we may have a couple. And we'll be posting it on our social media and sending it around. We sent it out to the chamber earlier today, Barry, and sending it all to the chambers and our economic development partners. So if you know anybody who you think might be interested, please let them know about it. Hopefully it will be a good step. You know, we've been talking about getting the paycheck protection money, getting the other loans, getting the other help. And so now here we are, we're getting ready to reopen and we're in a new world. So let's work together to help us all be successful. So So stay tuned, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. Stay safe. Bye-bye.